Entertalk Radio, you're in to all things music.
May the best brand win with Scott Robertson's Music Biz Marketing Strategies. Now, here's your host, Scott Robertson.
Hey, everybody. Happy Friday. You are tuned to May the Best Brand Win on Entertalk Media, the undisputed leader in music biz talk. And I am Scott, your host, and a man who is ready for another impossible mission tonight when I go see Mission Impossible Fallout, which is like the 10th movie in the series, I think. Back at the booth, we have Special Agent Paul B, making sure everything goes out over the airwaves okay. How's it going, Paul? There you go.
Pretty good.
Are you going to go see the new Mission Impossible?
I didn't realize that it's out this weekend, but I do want to see it. It looks pretty cool. Those movies. They're always like, oh god, another one. But then I always end up enjoying them, so I think I'm gonna have to.
They're good with the timeless Tom Cruise. You go look at him and you're just like the man who will never age, who will not age.
He's starting to. I don't know if you've seen what was that movie called where he was like the drug smuggler.
Yeah.
That one, he's starting to look a little bit haggard.
I did like that movie. That was on HBO. I just saw that. Yeah. Well, we could talk movies all day, but let's talk about the show for a second. So, anyway, I'm Scott Robertson. I run a public relations agency called Robertson Communications. If you want to reach me, here's how. You can catch me at scott@robertsoncom.com or on the website, robertsoncom, 2M's like communication.com, or on social media, facebook.com/robertsoncom, or on Twitter @robertsoncom. You see how it all goes together. You are tuned into episode 93 of the big show, which I call Marketing v. Privacy, round 10. You know, it's a tale as old as time. You know, marketing wants all the information about its audiences so it can, quote unquote, craft the perfect individualized message just for them at exactly the time they need it. And consumers think all marketing is uber creepy, and they want to give us fake names and numbers and everything else just to keep marketing away. Because marketing hasn't always behaved super responsibly with the data that's collected. And now Big Brother's coming knocking, and that's the sound of the government showing up. So with the general data privacy regulations in full effect in the UK and the EU, and California's new data privacy regulations, and just all kinds of conversations in privacy, it's the next battle between privacy and marketing is shaping up to be a big deal. And we have on the show today, very excited to have on the show today, renowned privacy expert Will Marshall from the UBM Law Group right here in lovely San Diego. He's going to be with us for the whole hour to discuss privacy, and we're going to have a good time doing it. So, Will, welcome to the program. How you doing today?
Great. Thank you, Scott. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to have you on here. And we're gonna spend some time talking about the big issue of privacy, which just seems to be snowballing into a bigger issue. It spills out into all facets of business. I'm sure it's going to be keeping you and your practice busy for some time to come, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. It couldn't get much hotter right now than in privacy with what's going on in Europe, what's going on in California, Vermont's passing laws. It's all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's get right into it. So I've got some interview questions. We're going to spend some time talking about privacy here in this first segment. And then, of course, as we always do, we're going to cut and talk to about who's winning and losing this week. And then Will's going to give you some great tips on keeping your privacy house in order here at the end of the show. So stick around for the whole hour, and we'll have some fun. So anyway, Will, just so everyone's clear, the issue of privacy, it isn't really new. Back in the 1980s, the firm of Hall & Oates said publicly, "Private eyes, they're watching you, watching your every move." And, that was just the 1980s.
And I'm old enough to remember those lines. I know them.
But today, seriously, we have new concerns. So, what are these new privacy regulations that we're hearing about, the GDPR and the California Data Privacy Initiative? What are those things?
Sure. Okay, so the GDPR is a pan-European single regulation across the whole of Europe, actually EEA. So it's 28 countries plus 3 others that joined it. And it's replacing a prior law. So it's an update to a prior regime called the Data Protection Directive, which was a whole bunch of laws in each country. They had their own interpretation of the directive, and that was a real pain to comply with all that patchwork. So they came out with a GDPR. They passed it in 2016. It's a single law, and it went into effect after that 2-year grace period in May 25th of this year. Basically, it's hard for us to think about it here because we think about data breach and identity theft and those types of things if we think about it much at all, or maybe we think about HIPAA or little siloed areas. But it's a data protection. It's not even right to say it's data privacy, because it's more than that. If you lose someone's data, you haven't breached their privacy, but you violated the principles of the GDPR because you lost their data. And there's a whole section about data subject rights that have nothing to do with privacy. Kind of tell me what you have, give me a copy of it. Maybe I can tell you to delete it, and you have to port it, all these different things. So it's much more comprehensive than anything that we have here. So that's the GDPR. And then the California law, while the GDPR is building on this long history of recognizing privacy as a fundamental right going back to World War II, and so it's incremental, even though to us it seems kind of out of the blue because nobody was paying attention to the prior law. California law does feel more out of the blue, and that's because of the way it was passed. There's a guy named Alistair McTaggart, who's a real estate developer of all things, who the story goes he was at a cocktail party talking to some privacy folks inside of Google who told him, hey, if you knew what we had on you, you'd be really afraid. And he took that to heart. Yeah. And he took that to heart and sort of started digging into this area and got really alarmed and afraid, and decided to fund a ballot initiative, and he got sufficient signatures in order to get that on the ballot. And so what happened is the industry, California legislature and industry advocates and those types of people said, wait a minute, if you get this on the ballot, the way the ballot process works, it's much harder to amend that ballot generated law than it is if the legislature passes it. And so they basically went into negotiations with the legislature, and this, because of the way the ballot process works, Alistair McTaggart wound up being the single decision maker because he has to be the one to withdraw his ballot initiative. So it was just him negotiating with the other side to work out a compromise. And in some very important ways, I can talk about the laws enacted as more watered down, but in some ways it's stronger. So strangely, but so anyway, they literally had like 8 days to draft this law. I mean, but from the time it was like June 8th, they kind of got together, and then basically 8 days they had from the time they sort of agreed in principle and then drafted it and then did it, and then McTaggart withdrew his ballot initiative and they passed the law. And so what that means is that the whole lobbying process that would normally happen and the careful drafting that would happen is all going to happen happening now. They're as we speak, industry's lobbying against it, and they're coming out working on amendments that will fix drafting errors, of which there are many, and they'll try to clean it up. And it goes into effect on January 1 of 2020. And so in one sense, we've got some time, but in the other sense, it's pretty tectonic. So we don't, if you're in the crosshairs of it, you don't have a lot of time in a sense. But that's kind of the backdrop. In the basic gist of it is it's sort of a subset of some of the rights under the GDPR. You have a right to kind of know what data a business is collecting, the right to ask them to delete it, the right to tell them not to share it, It sort of puts you in control of your data in some limited ways. It's strange because it's called the California Consumer Privacy Act, and they use the term consumer, and it's very typical in American privacy law to protect consumers, like purchasers of things, rather than just people. But when you look at the definition of consumer, it's a natural person living in California. So it's literally an employee, anybody. It's a misnomer to call it consumer. So it's everybody in California. And in that sense, it's, anybody around the world subject to it if they're, quote, doing business in California, which is it's hard to pin down and is very broad. So it's pretty much everybody's going to comply with this that's doing any sort of business in the U.S. And it's, I think, one of the frightening things about it from a business standpoint, or looking at it from that side, is in Europe we tend to they tend to have stringent laws, but they have this, like it or not, they have this bureaucracy to enforce it that wants you to be in compliance. So people aren't afraid to talk to regulators there. They're collaborative. They're saying, hey, okay, you're not 100% there. What can we do to get you in compliance? And if you got a fine, that's probably because you're being kind of difficult about the whole process. Whereas over here, we like to say, hey, class action attorneys, go at it. And it's a kind of a cheap way, you know what I'm saying? It's kind of a cheap way to not have a lot of bureaucratic enforcement, but to have a lot of enforcement, because basically these companies get crushed and it scares everybody into compliance. So, so when you take a sort of an equivalent law and then you pile on a private right of action, let me explain what that means. The ballot initiative that McTaggart came out with, he had a private right of action for any violation of the law, right? Yeah. And so that meant that you could sue, a private individual or a class action could sue for any violation, which was, whoa, exactly. One of the major compromises was they shrunk that down to where a private individual sends a letter saying, hey, you've breached my data. They can only do it for breach. So you breached my data, fix it within 30 days. Well, who knows if you can fix a breach in 30 days? That's one problem.
No kidding.
In theory, you have 30 days to cure. And then, so they have to prove you breached my data, somebody got it, and, and they don't have to produce, and you didn't have reasonable security measures. They don't have to prove harm. They just have to prove that those things happened. And the attorney general can then say, no, I want to take that case, or you can't bring that case, or go ahead and bring that case. They're kind of the traffic cop on that. But it's, instead of the whole thing, it's just this area of breach, and then the attorney general enforces all the other stuff like disclosure, all the other things you have to do to comply. So if you search this, if you search for this term a lot, you see a lot of companies that are advertising, achieve your GDPR compliance, avoid penalties, make sure you're compliant in California, things like that. I mean, is there such a thing as compliance, and if so, what does that look like? Yeah. So quickly to your point about the tools, I think a lot of IT security products out there got rebranded as GDPR compliance tools, and they're they're just focused on security, which is only one small portion of the GDPR. So, but I think the bigger problem is that even when those tools might be good, they're only tools. And so I see a lot of companies who are just trying to offload the work by hiring a consultant and a tool, employing a tool. But there's so much integral work in their business they need to do. If they don't have the resources to do that on the inside, it ain't happening. So that's one point. But to your broader point of whether there's GDPR compliance, I think absolutely there's GDPR compliance, because if, even though there's areas of the law that are still unclear, if you're bumping up against those issues of lack of clarity, you're good enough. In my opinion, you're nice. All the way there. So it doesn't really, the areas of lack of clarity are only affecting those ones that are really on top of it. But you can definitely comply, and it involves a whole host of things: internal policies, training, systems, security, audits. It's a whole range of things. Agreements with the companies you share data with. It's a big deal. A lot of people think of it as their privacy notice, and they just say, "Well, update my privacy notice," but it's much more than that.
Cool. We got about 2 minutes left in this segment, so I want to make sure we get through to all these questions.
Yeah.
So how do you think these regulations will change or shape marketing communications in the future?
I think they will shape them potentially pretty dramatically, because one of the debates in GDPR is whether it's valid consent. If you say, "Hey, give me your data, I'm going to use it for this other purpose in exchange for this free app I'm giving you," is that really valid consent? And so, if the answer is no, then our whole free app economy kind of goes in the toilet. So, that's one way. And then this California law, if you have a rash of class actions, that's going to chill, marketing and a lot of other things.
Do you think the party's over for people like, Google? You mentioned the California data law came from a cocktail party with Google. And to me, I always say on the show, Google seems to me like they're like a small child where they just don't see the ways that they just kind of see the great rosy, hope and optimism about how, their stuff could be used for good, but they don't see that marketing is going to use it for really creepy purposes, right? And then we've only got about a minute left, but just speak to that. Do you think that is the party over for Google? Are these guys going to have to? And obviously there's national regulations coming on the top of this. Do you think these tech companies are going to have to? Is the party over for them?
I think it's less over for them, because Google and Facebook oftentimes they're generating the data and using it. They're not spreading that profile data they have. They're just helping you target people internally, and they've got a ton of resources to comply. And a $5 billion fine like Google just got is like a fraction of their quarterly profit. So I think they have to change, but it's not party over. It's more party over for smaller companies that can't afford to comply.
Yeah, smaller companies, absolutely. Well, this has been really enlightening in this during this first segment. We're gonna come back, in the second segment, and we're gonna talk about who's winning and losing. But stick around, because Will's gonna stick around and give us some tips on staying privacy compliant. We'll see you in a few minutes. Thanks.
Are you serious about your music? Are you ready to run with the big dogs? The experts at Pitbull Audio have the gear to get you into the game. From leading manufacturers like Mesa Boogie, Fender, Pioneer, and American Audio. To sound your best, you need the best. Pitbull Audio can deliver in rehearsal, on stage, and into the big time. Dropping beats, shredding guitar, or making the crowd roar. Whatever you dream, Pitbull Audio can help make it happen. We are Pitbull Audio. We want you to play it loud. PitbullAudio.com.
This is Jackie Bertoni from Jackie's Groove. Come join me weekly on my journey through the music business as I take you behind the velvet rope, interviewing industry notables such as Al Di Meola, Michael McDonald, and Al Jarreau, to name but a few. Listen to their stories on being in the studios recording #1 hits and onto the stages throughout the globe. Allow me to be your music historian. You can hear me live every Monday at 2 p.m. and every Wednesday at 12 noon Pacific Standard Time, or 24/7 on jackiesgroove.com. Ready to get your groove on?
Hi, I'm Tim Dolbear, the host of Sound Experience on Entertalk Radio. Each week, I talk with top professional audio engineers, producers, musicians, and the manufacturers that make the tools that we use in the studio each and every day. From capturing the perfect take to mastering your final release, and the tools and how the pros use them, we are going to dive deep into their process and learn from their experience. I look forward to you joining us each week on Sound Experience with me, your host, Tim Dolbear.
Make this your vinyl night. I'm John J.R. Robinson, and every week, music creation comes alive through stories, experiences, and sounds when vinyl records filled our hearts and minds. My friends and I share our tips and techniques used in creation of iconic tracks for recording artists such as Michael Jackson, Eric Clapton, Quincy Jones, and Steve Winwood, to name a few. Vinyl has emerged hot, and the soul of vinyl defines art and passion which burns deepest at night. Tune in every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on EntertalkRadio.com.
May the best brand win with Scott Robertson's Music Biz Marketing Strategies. Now, here's your host, Scott Robertson.
Hey, everybody. Happy Friday. You are so smart today because you tuned in to May the Best Brand Win on Entertalk Media, the undisputed leader in music biz talk. I am Scott, your host. I'm here with renowned privacy expert Will Marshall from the UBM Law Group in San Diego. Will, how's it going so far?
It's going great.
All right, good, man, good. And Will gave us some great stuff in the first segment, about the ever-changing nature of privacy. In this segment, too, like we always do, we're going to talk about who is winning and losing. And we're going to start off with Nike. And Nike's winning this week. They're getting some positive press because they are about to give 7,000 of their employees a raise. Nike announced to employees this week that 7,000 workers would be getting a pay bump after the conclusion of an internal review, according to the Wall Street Journal. And they're also going to change how they award bonuses to employees and that kind of stuff. They said the changes were to, quote, support a culture which employees feel included and empowered. And my guess is paid more money from what I just saw. So that's kind of exciting. Basically, they're making updates to the pay and awards program. They didn't really, they weren't super clear as to kind of how they do bonuses necessarily. But hey, you got to say if you're giving 7,000 employees a raise all at once, we're going to put you in winning. And they got a lot of positive love on social media from probably folks getting raises, would be my guess. Yay, Nike! Thanks for giving me a raise. That's what I say.
It's nice to see a retailer doing well and doing the right thing in a tough market. But this was in response to claims of some workplace issues. If I'm right,
I'm sure it's true. I'm sure that's true. I'm sure that they have enough employees that they probably have 24/7 litigation going on about what employees want and be to.
But they did the right thing.
Yeah, they did. They did. Well, let's so definitely Nike, you're winning this week. Good job. Facebook, man, Facebook's in losing this week because their press about their earnings call and their they posted the largest one-day loss in market value by any company in United States stock market history after releasing a disastrous quarterly report. The social media giant's market capitalization plummeted by $119 billion to $510 billion as its stock price plummeted by 19%. And at Wednesday's close, the market cap it totals $630 billion. Now, all of the stuff that's come out since that happened, kind of midweek, has been it was interesting. The day they were doing their earnings report, it was like I saw a thing in Recode that said, "Is Facebook unsinkable?" They have these huge privacy violations. They go in front of Congress, step in it there. They have all kinds of problems. They have to do these corporate apology ads, which are terrible, by the way. And they have to do all that kind of stuff. And it didn't really affect their revenue. But then they released this disastrous market report. The only real bright spot is the fact that, Instagram is really up in terms of advertising, as we've been talking about on this program. But, it's and then an article in today's from CNET today says for Facebook and Twitter, reality is starting to hit really hard, and it really has to do with the issue that we're talking about on the show today. It has a lot to do with privacy. It has a lot to do with the issue we talked about last week with a bunch of fake accounts on Twitter. Twitter had to kill 1,000 fake accounts, and it has to do with this idea of where is influence today in marketing. If influence is by the number of people that I reach with a certain message and I faked all of those numbers to get there, then, did I really reach anyone? And did the brand really reach anyone? And Facebook having to answer the same kind of questions because what people log into Facebook to do is not to see sponsored posts, is not to see creepy ads, is not to have retargeting strategies focused at them, is not to do any of that. Facebook is a giant mirror that sort of feeds everybody's individual vanity. It's just sort of designed to do that, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on that, Will. Facebook had a hard week, and the P word, the privacy word, came up a lot in those conversations.
For sure. I think it's one thing to have Zuckerberg go out in front of Congress and maybe not look good or what have you, but when the bill for all that privacy compliance comes through in the form of earnings, and they're saying, look, we've got to invest heavily in privacy, and that's going to impact our earnings going forward, then the market says, okay, that on top of all this other stuff, maybe it's not as rosy as we thought, and they punish the stock accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. And quite a lot of negative press too, aside from those kind of unsinkable articles that I saw 2 of those on that morning, and then after that, since then, it's just been everybody trying to run out of a burning building, so you can get to the exits faster.
Yes, the image.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so we're going to put Facebook in losing. Yeah, sorry about that, Facebook. United States newspapers. I always try to cover the media on this show a bit and just let everybody know what's going on with the media. About a third of large U.S. newspapers have suffered layoffs since 2017. The newspaper business is not doing well. I saw this week that the New York Daily News laid off 2/3 of its newsroom staff. Imagine your company, and now they lay off 2/3 of the company. And then we kind of wonder, and then we're like, what? Like, where is fact checking in the news today? What's happened to journalism? What's happened to journalism is there ain't nobody doing it anymore. There's a skeleton crew trying to hold up the journalistic responsibilities that used to be held by a lot more people.
Yeah, especially on the local level. I mean, that nobody's at state houses anymore. It just doesn't happen.
Oh, it's so true. It's so true. And it's just, it's just amazing that almost every major newspapers, there have been staff layoffs at 110 newspapers and 35 digital native news outlets since 2017. So, this is something that journalism hasn't cracked yet, is the idea of, and it plays into this privacy thing that we're talking about today, because people have a perception now that news content is free, right? And news content is free. And then when you try to charge them a paywall, they'll just go somewhere else. And get the information. And then when you set up your ad blockers, if you go to Business Insider, they say, I see you have an ad blocker set up. We make our money via advertising, so could you please turn off the ad blocker, and we'd be happy to show you the content for free. And they're just kind of like, and you're like, oh yeah, that's right, because if my ad blocker's on, then I am eliminating their one source of revenue that they have left. And while I sort of feel bad about it, gotta say, the fact is that our perception has kind of shifted, and now we expect the news to be free, completely free. And now we don't want to watch any commercials, when it has to do with, with anything like that. And so, I don't know how journalism is going to crack that, to be honest. What is journalism going to be able to charge for if you won't sit through their advertising?
I don't know. And I feel like there's this years of the brand on one side and the publisher on the other. And there's all this ugliness in terms of privacy that happens happens in ad tech in the middle, and nobody wanted to see it, nobody cared, and now it's coming to roost, and it could blow up a very legitimate way of funding journalism and other important things.
It's definitely something we have to watch, and the credibility of journalism, as we've talked about many times on this show, public relations, my profession is tied very much to the fact that people continue to receive and trust the media, and if those trust numbers continue to fall, no one. That's why public relations is going to so many things like, well, let's go target influencers. And then you find out that, influencers aren't really targeting, they don't really have in their following, 14 to 17-year-old girls. They have, 30-year-old Bangladeshi guys with big bushy beards.
That's not a valuable demographic?
I don't think so, man. I don't know. Maybe it depends on what you're marketing. I mean, if you're marketing shave cream or, soap, something, man, I would say. I don't know, but it's something definitely to watch. And I don't know. I don't know how journalism is going to solve it. I really don't, because they're going to have to come up with something brilliant to solve it. But anyway, in lieu of that, but we're going to put all those newspapers in the losing column. We're sorry about it, but that's what happened. So, Pinterest. I get a lot of questions about Pinterest. They say, you never talk about Pinterest. Pinterest is kind of the forgotten social network, yada, yada. Well, here's one about Pinterest. So Pinterest they've near $1 billion in ad sales, and its valuation has risen as it looks to go public in mid-2019. So, Pinterest it's been a weird social network that people don't really know what to do with, because while it was really good for kind of like almost like a digital pin board where you can kind of pin up, photos and things like that. Instagram sort of does that a little better, right? And it did have a really strong, huge following among like mommy bloggers and people like that who could do. It was great for recipes. It was great for a lot of things like that. But also Tumblr came in, and Tumblr has, certainly a very similar posting model, I guess you would say, a very similar structure as Pinterest. But Pinterest actually is approaching $1 billion in ad revenue. So yay, Pinterest. We're going to say that's awesome. And they are pushing towards an IPO in the middle of next year. And it's quite a boost in sort of ad sales. And again, this is something that every social network has to wrestle with. If the revenue is going to be in ad sales, and yet people don't want advertising. It's a theme that we've talked about in just about every one of these stories. But if you know that, then it's like, then how are you going to make money if people don't want advertising? And believe me, we could be on this program for a long time trying to solve that one. But it is an interesting story, and we got to say congratulations to Pinterest for that. Will, you ever use Pinterest for any reason?
I did a little bit here and there, but I find that when I do Google searches and it comes up with a lot of Pinterest, image searches, it's like, oh, great, it's on Pinterest. I have to log in. I don't have a, so it's a little bit annoying there. But I have used it for some projects, and it was good.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what they call themselves? The president of the Havas Media Group, one of the biggest ad agencies on the planet, he says they use Pinterest as a huge insights engine. Which, if that sounded creepy to you,
really creepy.
It's exactly that. What they mean by that is, and all's fair in love and war, I guess. But what they mean by that is they monitor people's accounts, find out what they're interested in, and then, yes, you may have guessed it, they try to design some type of advertising that is going to be appropriate for you. And that again, that comes down to the core of this, right? The core of this is marketing. If marketing has, even if they have great intentions, those intentions stand in direct opposition to what consumers actually want. And it's generational too, because millennials don't feel it the same way. But people that are sort of my age in their late 40s and stuff, we have a real privacy thing that comes up on us that is, and generations of that are older than us definitely have it. It seems to fade as people get or as you move down the spectrum and younger audiences. Will, do you see that?
Absolutely. Young people just simply don't, their fence of where privacy is out in space, and ours is, right up in front of us when you're a little bit older. I definitely see that all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, which actually that's probably promising to the media world and the advertising world, because if you're marketing to younger consumers, honestly, you could probably get away with more without, violating, public opinion and that sort of thing.
For sure.
And the reason the government's involved is because, Facebook screwed up monumentally, and they pushed the public opinion time to get upset button, and when that button gets pressed and everybody starts talking about it, then government action, legal action usually is not too far behind. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So it's that public opinion thing that is, why we're talking about any of this, to be quite honest.
Yep.
So we're gonna put Pinterest in winning. Let's talk about Papa John's for a second. I talked about this story a little bit last week. Papa John himself made, John Shatner made a racial slur comment on a conference call with one of his agencies, and he got outed for that, and then he resigned as chairman of the company, and they bounced him right out. But the story behind this is really, it's like an episode of like Papa John's Pizza Law and Order coming at you. It's like, so Papa John's, basically, their board adopted a shareholder rights plan, which they call a poison pill, with a 15% trigger to deter existing stockholders from amassing a controlling stake in the company. And they also declared a dividend of one right for each outstanding common share. We'll get into like investor relations side of things. But then Shatner basically sued the company and the board, basically saying that the board didn't conduct an investigation. They shouldn't have accepted his resignation. And, hey, I didn't really want to resign and that kind of thing. And then now it's like the board, created some kind of a coup, and they set up this poison pill thing. And this story is just getting infinitely more interesting than just a guy that said something stupid on a conference call. It's now sort of become this, kind of corporate espionage type of story that I'm sure will make a fine movie with Matt Damon starring as Papa John Shatner at some time.
They adopted the pill after they booted him out?
Yeah. They sure did. They sure did, yeah.
Aggressive.
Aggressive. And there's all kinds of stuff been written about this. But I think it's interesting from the standpoint of the brand is that there's people, in charge of sort of defending the brand. And there's all of this instability and battling going on at the top just based, around this error. And it's just kind of... It's kind of makes that job harder in a highly competitive space, which is has Domino's and Pizza Hut and a lot of other really big companies who are very aggressive in trying to get market share.
Sure, it reminds me of Lululemon when the founder made some comment about, hey, these pants aren't designed for every type of body, and he got roasted for that.
That's right.
He interpreted as large people, and
that's right.
He got pushed out because of that.
That's right. You guys are tuned to May the Best Brand Win on Entertalk Media. Come on back. Will's going to give us some tips on privacy for the third segment. We'll see you in a few minutes. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Tim Dolbear, the host of Sound Experience on Entertalk Radio. Each week, I talk with top professional audio engineers, producers, musicians, and the manufacturers that make the tools that we use in the studio each and every day. From capturing the perfect take to mastering your final release, and the tools and how the pros use them, we are going to dive deep into their process and learn from their experience. I look forward to you joining us each week on Sound Experience with me, your host, Tim Dolbear.
Are you serious about your music? Are you ready to run with the big dogs? The experts at Pitbull Audio have the gear to get you into the game. From leading manufacturers like Mesa Boogie, Fender, Pioneer, and American Audio. To sound your best, you need the best. Pitbull Audio can deliver in rehearsal, on stage, and into the big time. Dropping beats, shredding guitar, or making the crowd roar. Whatever you dream, Pitbull Audio can help make it happen. We are Pitbull Audio. We want you to play it loud. PitbullAudio.com.
Make this your vinyl night. I'm John J.R. Robinson, and every week, music creation comes alive through stories, experiences, and sounds when vinyl records filled our hearts and minds. My friends and I share our tips and techniques used in creation of iconic tracks for recording artists such as Michael Jackson, Eric Clapton, Quincy Jones, and Steve Winwood, to name a few. Vinyl has emerged hot, and the soul of vinyl defines art and passion which burns deepest at night. Tune in every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on EntertalkRadio.com.
This is Jackie Bertoni from Jackie's Groove. Come join me weekly on my journey through the music business as I take you behind the velvet rope, interviewing industry notables such as Al Di Meola, Michael McDonald, and Al Jarreau, to name but a few. Listen to their stories on being in the studios recording #1 hits and onto the stages throughout the globe. Allow me to be your music historian. You can hear me live every Monday at 2 p.m. and every Wednesday at 12 noon Pacific Standard Time or 24/7 on jackiesgroove.com. Ready to get your groove on?
May the best brand win with Scott Robertson's Music Biz Marketing Strategies. Now, here's your host, Scott Robertson.
Hey, happy Friday, everybody. You are tuned to May the Best Brand Win on Entertalk Media, the undisputed leader in music biz talk. I'm Scott, your host. With me on the show today is Will Marshall from UBM Law Group in San Diego, California. Will, it's been awesome having you on the show so far. You having fun?
Thank you. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
All right, great. Well, good. Well, that brings us to segment 3, and Will's put together some great tips for kind of keeping your privacy house in order. And so, hey, get ready to enjoy. So I will turn it over to you, Will. Why don't you go ahead and give us your very first tip?
Sure. I thought about these in the context of GDPR, but I think a lot of them apply equally well to the California privacy law. First tip is don't panic. I see a lot of companies that sort of, they look like a deer in the headlights with these laws. Maybe they've hired a big firm that's, trying to explain it to them, and they're just kind of lost. And they feel like, well, let me just wait and see what happens with enforcement, or I just can't deal with this or whatever. Better to do the low-hanging fruit and be 30% compliant than to be 0% compliant, caught flat-footed when something goes down. So that would be my my first tip.
That's great. So so it's important that folks don't just kind of freeze up and and kind of freak out about it. They kind of approach it, in a thoughtful fashion.
Yeah, and there's always easy things you can do towards compliance. So, just do them.
Nice. Very, very good. Well, great. What's tip number 2 for us?
Tip number 2 is, we tend to think in the United States about personal information as my name plus my social security number, or my name plus my bank account, or something that could involve identity theft, some really sensitive data. But in Europe, and under this new California privacy law, the notion of personal information or personal data is incredibly broad. It's anything that could identify a person. And under the California law, it's anything that could identify a household or a device, which presents a lot of weird issues. If you ask for a copy of your data for your household and you suddenly have your roommate's information, that presents some weird outcomes. But in any event, very, very broad. And a lot of people, when you undertake these compliance efforts, you kind of got to do an inventory of what you got and where it's going and all of that. And people overlook a lot because they think, well, they don't even think that that's personal data. They're just thinking first name, last name, really obvious stuff. So, and the other way they miss it is they don't think broadly in terms of how they share data. So they got somebody in their such and such department using a cloud-based app that they don't even know about. And they say, oh, well, that app is not doing anything with my data. It's just storing it. Well, under GDPR, they are processing that data for you, and you need to take steps with respect to them. So it's easy to overlook ways you're sharing data that you don't realize.
Interesting. So like a company like for any small business, use like MailChimp or something like that.
Yep.
Obviously they collect a lot of, they don't collect data. They kind of house your data. It's a good way to say it.
MailChimp, Salesforce, all of those things, any sort of cloud-based things you're using and you're putting data up there, they're a data processor for you under the GDPR, and you have to have an agreement with them covering various things.
Interesting. Like an individual agreement, or do they just make sure their house is in order?
That you have to have under Article 28 of GDPR, you have to have an agreement that has certain provisions in it, that they'll only process the data on your instructions, that they'll have technical measures, they'll enter into similar agreements with their processors and so on. There's a handful of things that need to be in that agreement with them, and it's often done as a separate sort of attachment to your services agreement.
Oh, interesting. So look out. There's more agreements coming your way that you shouldn't just blow through and agree to the terms and conditions on or whatever. You should read through and make sure you got it.
Pay for my kids' braces.
Exactly. Hey, so another question I want to ask just real quick was, there's so many companies that make their living by selling data, right?
Yep.
List companies and those kind of things. What are those companies doing? These days, are they just is it just kind of business as usual for the list companies or what?
I think they have their head in the sand. I think it's a pretty sometimes a fragmented market, and they're not. They're just not paying attention to it. And it's funny because you asked that because the California law tries to filter out small companies by saying, oh, it's you have to have revenue over 25 million, or you have to be half of your revenue is from selling people's data, which is unclear what exactly that means or could mean. But the other one is you collect or sell data of 50,000 or more households, people, or devices. Well, sell is one thing, but collect, you could have a hot website and be collecting 50,000 people's names in a month, let alone a year. So a lot of small companies could get swept into this this cutoff that was really intended to sort of capture people trading in data, and it's going to sweep in a lot more than that.
Interesting. Well, cool. Well, why don't you give us so tip 1 was don't panic. Tip 2 is make sure you're thinking broadly about this stuff. What's your third tip?
Third tip is to take a risk-based approach. 100% compliance. It may be a 2-year project. You may never get there, but think about the activities and the data you're handling that present the most risk. What's the most sensitive data? If you've got a public list of names, that's technically covered by the GDPR. If it's encrypted, it's technically covered by the GDPR. Are the risks to individuals there? Maybe not. So, you focus your resources where you're doing the most risky activities and pick up that sort of high risk stuff first and focus on that. And it's completely reasonable under the GDPR to say, this data is not as risky. I'm going to do this much. I'm going to be on a 5 on the security scale, and this data over here I'm going to be a 10 because it's super sensitive data. So it's okay to think about it that way, and you should. Interesting. And when we talk about GDPR for a second, so there have been no cases for the GDPR yet. There have been no fines levied yet. Is that accurate? But when do you think we'll see that? Well, you're seeing it now. I mean, within hours of the GDPR going into effect, a private rights advocacy group filed actions against Google, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. Wow. Yeah, for billions and billions of dollars, and that was coming. This was the same guy who invalidated Safe Harbor, which is an older privacy agreement between the EU and the US. And what that complaint is saying is that, going back to what I earlier said, they say that it's not valid consent when a company like Facebook says you must consent to my use of this creepy stuff over here in order to access my website. And so that's the gist of that complaint. And there are other smaller complaints and actions ongoing. But I got to say, more than a third of the countries in the EU haven't even implemented the law to put GDPR into effect in their country. Wow! Even though technically it's in effect, they're just behind the 8 ball. So it's as a practical matter, they can kind of enforce it, but they have these implementing laws in each country, and a third of them haven't even done it. So they're behind the 8 ball on a number of things, and their budgets aren't that big. One of the biggest enforcement agencies, their annual budget's $9 million, or or euros rather. So
wow. Yeah.
it's an interesting one.
That will be interesting, and then so it won't just so it's basically, like you said, a consumer privacy organization, filing lawsuits against Facebook and Instagram and those kind of things. But will there be fines that are owed to the government?
Yeah, under the GDPR, they do, and a person can actually get compensation under the GDPR. They could file for sort of their own damages, but oftentimes it's these enforcement agencies that kind of go after companies. So it's more bureaucratic there than here, where we have a lot of these private rights of action, class actions. I will say on the California side, the Attorney General gets to keep 20% of the fines that they levy. Whoa. So that to fund their own enforcement activities. And that's always a scary feedback loop because, they're motivated. That's similar to Spain had a regime like that where they were sort of self-funding, and it creates this really aggressive enforcement effort, as you can imagine.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, yay, self. We have a self-funding department. All we have to do is just sue a bunch of big folks that are going to settle with us in court.
Well, that's the problem. This California law is a lot of these violations for breach, these class actions. They're questions of fact that the jury has to decide. By the time you get in front of the jury, you've spent $20 million on the lawsuit. You've settled long before that. So that's the problem.
Yeah, so they'll settle with the government long before that reaches a courtroom.
Well, they'll settle in these. I'm talking more about the class actions under the California
the class actions.
Class action attorneys. They know that it costs so much to prove their case out. It doesn't really matter who's right. It doesn't matter if they had adequate safeguards because you're never going to answer that. You're going to get buried in litigation costs and settle out. So it's tough that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, real quickly, you sent me a thing before the show today. You said the Trump administration's talking to Facebook and Google, and it looks like United States Congress might be trying to draft its own GDPR. Is that true? I thought it would be the FTC for sure, but it's going to be Congress.
Well, yeah. What's going on is that the Commerce Department actually was tasked with coming up with a set of principles or a blueprint by the fall. And they've been working on it for the last month. They've met with, they've had over 22 meetings with more than 80 organizations over this last month. And their goal is to say, here, Congress, or, in theory, it could be a set of federal guidelines, voluntary guidelines, who knows? But in theory, it could be an act of Congress. Here, Congress, this is what we think. We've worked it out with all these stakeholders. And it's going to depend a lot what happens on the midterm elections, where that will go. And but I think they're trying to get in front of this California thing, and they're saying, whoa, let's get a more business friendly version of this, and we'll see how well they do with it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, cool. We'll go back to your tips. So for your first tip was don't panic. Your second one was think broadly. Your third one was make sure you take a risk-based approach. And what's your fourth tip then, Will?
My fourth tip is minimize that data. I'll tell you a story. There was a company that was trying to get cyber insurance, and they had like 60 million records of individuals, and the insurance carrier said, no, thank you. But they looked into it and realized that like 40 million of them, they didn't need to access all the time. So they took it off their network. They encrypted it, stuck it in a closet or, safe room, and they were able to get insurance. So it was just needless risk. And that's a principle of the GDPR. Minimize data. Don't collect data you don't need. And it's tough because it runs counter to everything Silicon Valley believes and big data believes. Yeah. More data, the better. Absolutely. So those are in tension, but you can really minimize if you don't need to collect a social security number, don't collect it, and you'll reduce your risk.
Yeah. I will say I was looking for my account number. Recently, I had to write it down on something and write my full account number down. And now they've gotten so used to like giving you the last two numbers of your account number, or whatever. It's like you can't find your account number. I was like, I don't know my account number. I know the last two digits. Oh, it's wicked private. It's like I couldn't even find it.
I know. You got to get like authentication tokens to your phone and all this stuff.
Exactly.
I know.
I'm like, but it's me. Wait.
I swear.
I will be responsible with my own data. I promise. That's too funny.
Yeah. Well, that's the big problem under these laws is you have to give people data, but you have to authenticate them. So somebody says, give me my data, and then you give it to the wrong person, you've just had a data breach. So it's that issue you raise is a real challenge under these laws, both of them.
Yeah, no doubt. So collect the personal data that you really, really need. Have a good conversation about what you really need, and make sure you're not collecting that, because as you mentioned, the more data that you're collecting, the more potentially at risk you are, for legal action, against your company for this, right?
Yep. Can't breach data you don't have.
Yeah, good point. Well, cool. And so what is your last tip for us then, Will?
Well, my last tip is if you're sort of standing there, embarking on the process, and you're figuring out where to start, one of the things you need to emphasize is things that are going to drive your exposure. And so under GDPR, it's your privacy notice, because guess what? Enforcement authorities can look up your privacy notice on your website and see if you know what you're talking about, or if it talks about safe harbor that was invalidated in 2015 and is gone and you're still talking about it. They can tell if you are compliant by looking within a few minutes of reading your privacy notice. So even though your privacy notice says a lot about your compliance program and you may not have worked that out, you can dramatically improve it. And then as you work out your compliance, you can dial it in further. The other thing is data subject requests, people's requests for their data. If you let those pile up from Europe, that's going to lead the enforcement agencies to your door, because they're looking for hotspots of complaints, and that's what's telling them where to aim their arrows. So don't be that guy. If somebody's asking for their data in that type of way, you got to be all over it. And so you can kind of get these outward facing indications of your compliance, or things that are going to sort of start pointing arrows at you. Get a handle on that as best you can while you get your ducks in the row in behind the scenes. Nice.
Well, cool. We just got under a minute left. I just want to give people an opportunity. Will, you've been great on the show today. You do this stuff for a living. How can people get in touch with you if they have privacy questions for their businesses?
Sure. They can go to our website, which is www.ubmlaw.com. My email is wmarshall with 2 L's, wmarshall@ubmlaw.com, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that people have on how this stuff works.
Fantastic. Well, kids, what did we learn today? We learned that privacy is going to be the next battleground for social networks, for marketing, for everything, for a long time to come. My very special thanks to Will Marshall for turning it up to 11. There you go. And for joining us on the program today. Thanks very much, Will.
Thank you.
That's it for me, folks. Until next week, this has been Scott Robertson, host of May the Best Brand Win on Entertalk Media. Rock on, and don't collect any data you don't need to. We'll talk to you. You know what's all around you every waking moment of your life? Marketing. You're choking on it. I'm Scott Robertson, and when it comes to strategic PR, branding, and marketing, I've seen it all. And actually, I'm still seeing it, because bad marketing never sleeps. Join me each week on May the Best Brand Win, right here on Entertalk Radio, and learn how to make the marketing for your brand unforgettable.
Hi, this is Tim Dolbear from Eclectica Studios. I'm a full-time mixing and recording engineer. I work with Grammy winners, labels, and indie artists, using state-of-the-art digital mixing and restoration tools and the very best in analog gear. Really, though, it's my ability to bring tracks to life and fulfill your vision for your music. This has made me sought after by producers and artists worldwide. So spend your time working on music and not chasing a mix down a rabbit hole. Go to timdolbear.com and check out our free one-song mix offer.
Are you serious about your music? Are you ready to run with the big dogs? The experts at Pitbull Audio have the gear to get you into the game. From leading manufacturers like Mesa Boogie, Fender, Pioneer, and American Audio. To sound your best, you need the best. Pitbull Audio can deliver in rehearsal, on stage, and into the big time. dropping beats, shredding guitar, or making the crowd roar. Whatever you dream, Pitbull Audio can help make it happen. We are Pitbull Audio. We want you to play it loud. PitbullAudio.com.
This is Jackie Bertoni from Jackie's Groove. Come join me weekly on my journey through the music business as I take you behind the velvet rope, interviewing industry notables such as Al Di Meola, Michael McDonald, and Al Jarreau, to name but a few. Listen to their stories on being in the studios recording #1 hits and onto the stages throughout the globe. Allow me to be your music historian. You can hear me live every Monday at 2 p.m. and every Wednesday at 12 noon Pacific Standard Time or 24/7 on jackiesgroove.com. Ready to get your groove on?